Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the girl Archie forgot. Right now, over 85% of the people watching aren't subscribed. If you've been enjoying these Nero Wolfe stories, hitting that subscribe button is the best way to be sure you never miss the next mystery. Your support helps keep these stories alive and lets us keep bringing them to you. The late afternoon light slanted through the cafe's tall windows, softened by a film of grime that had resisted the waiter's half-hearted polishing for years. The brass rail along the counter carried the tarnish of countless hands, and the air smelled of coffee ground to exhaustion, fried onions, and the faint, sweet tang of pipe smoke drifting from the street outside. I'd stopped in for a cup of coffee, more from habit than hunger, and settled at a corner table with a view of both the door and the clock above the register. A detective's instincts don't allow for blind spots, even when the only threat is the lunch crowd hurrying to finish before the rain came down. She entered as if she belonged to the room, yet with a glance that suggested she was seeking someone specific. I would have sworn I had never seen her before, but she moved directly toward me, smiling with a familiarity that left no room for doubt. Her hair, the pale gold of champagne left in sunlight, caught in the dusty beams that fell across the tiled floor. She wore a light green dress, cut neatly at the waist, and gloves that looked fresh from the box. When she reached my table, she placed a hand on the back of the chair opposite mine and leaned slightly forward. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, her voice low enough to keep it between us. "I thought you might not recognize me, but you haven't changed a bit." I set my cup down carefully and studied her. "That makes one of us," I said. "Because I'm afraid you have the advantage. Where was it?" Her expression flickered, amusement mixed with something like disappointment. "Weeks ago. The dance hall on 56th. We even talked, though not for long." I never forget a face. In my line of work, one overlooked glance can unravel weeks of careful watching. Yet as I looked at her, trying to call back a single detail, my mind offered nothing but an irritating blank. I gestured for her to sit, and she did, smoothing her skirt and folding her gloved hands on the table. "You danced with me," she said. "The band was playing I Only Have Eyes for You. You made some remark about the clarinetist's shoes being too tight." It was the kind of line I might deliver, and the detail rang true, but still her face struck no chord of memory. She seemed certain enough for both of us. I studied the set of her jaw, the delicate shape of her nose, the eyes that watched me too closely, as though measuring the effect of every word. "Miss," I prompted, hoping a name might stir something. She shook her head with a faint smile. "Let's say Claire. It will do as well as any." "Claire," I repeated, drawing it out as though trying the taste of it. "All right, Claire, I'm still drawing blanks. What brings you here, other than to rattle my professional pride?" Her hands shifted, one moving toward her handbag, then retreating. She glanced toward the window, where the first drops of rain were sketching lines down the glass. The room had grown noisier with the dinner crowd starting to drift in, but she kept her voice steady. "You remember enough," she said, "more than you admit. That's why I came. There may be trouble, and you seem the sort who could manage it." The waiter appeared, impatient to clear the table or take her order, but she waved him away with a polite shake of the head. I let the silence stretch, giving her space to explain, though it was clear she was struggling against some inner hesitation. Finally, she reached into her bag, withdrew a folded slip of paper, and slid it across the table. Her fingers lingered on it a moment before pulling back. "Don't open it here," she said. "Read it later, somewhere you can think. You'll understand why I came." The paper was plain, folded twice, with nothing on the outside but the faint imprint of her perfume. I slipped it into my inside pocket without comment, though curiosity gnawed at me. She rose then, glancing again at the clock. Her movements were quick, as though the walls themselves pressed her to leave. I stood out of courtesy, though she gave me no chance to escort her. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, pausing long enough for her gaze to catch mine. "I knew you wouldn't forget, even if you say otherwise." And with that she was gone, stepping into the wet shimmer of the street as the rain began to patter steadily against the awning. I remained standing for a moment, watching her vanish into the blur of umbrellas and passing headlights. I sat again, frowning at the cup that had gone cold in my absence of mind. The room seemed louder, the air heavier, though nothing had changed except the weight in my pocket. A detective prides himself on his memory, and I had never misplaced a face before. If she had spoken the truth, then either I was losing the edge, or she had counted on my weakness for precision to bait a hook. I finished the coffee, paid the check, and walked into the rain with the paper pressing against my chest. The city stretched around me, wet stone and glistening asphalt, the kind of evening that made the lights blur and the shadows deepen. I thought of Wolfe at home in his chair, orchids breathing their perfumed air, safe from weather and chance encounters. He would dismiss the meeting as trifling until the facts proved otherwise, but I knew already it would follow me back to the brownstone. Some threads refused to stay untangled, especially when tied to a woman who insisted on being remembered. The rain had thickened by the time I returned to the brownstone, my hat brim leaking in steady trickles as I climbed the steps. Fritz admitted me with his usual courtesy, accepting the umbrella with a look of faint reproach at its condition. The house smelled of stewing beef and onions, a comfort after the sour damp of midtown streets. I brushed water from my coat and stepped into the office, where Wolfe sat enthroned among the lamplight, the great globe of his head bent over a book in calfskin binding. I drew the slip of paper from my pocket and laid it on his desk blotter. Wolfe did not glance up immediately. He finished the paragraph before closing the volume and resting a finger on the folded note. "What is this?" he asked, voice carrying both curiosity and annoyance. "From a young woman I encountered at a cafe," I said. "She seemed anxious to be remembered. The handwriting may explain why." He unfolded the page with a delicacy that suggested reluctance. His lips pressed together as he read the words, "Please, help me. They will not let me go. Trust no one." The message was brief, hurried, with ink blotted in one corner as though the writer had pressed too hard. Wolfe grunted. Melodrama, the kind churned out in penny novels and left in taxicabs. "I thought so myself," I admitted, but she looked me squarely in the eye when she gave it. Either she knows me well enough to play on my vanity, or the fear was genuine. He folded the paper again, slower this time, and placed it beneath a small brass paperweight shaped like an eagle. There is no specificity. They may be creditors, lovers, or phantoms of her imagination. Trust no one is self-defeating advice. What am I to infer? That a woman thought her danger was real enough to risk confiding in me, and since she seemed to believe I already knew her, which I didn't, the coincidence is interesting. Wolfe sighed and leaned back in the yellow chair, closing his eyes. Interesting, yes. Useful, no. We cannot proceed on a scrap of hysteria delivered by a stranger. I was about to argue further when the doorbell rang. Fritz, who never answered such intrusions, stepped softly from the dining room, brows drawn with concern. He opened the front door with hesitation, and a moment later, a figure crossed the threshold into the hall. It was the girl from the cafe, Claire, as she had called herself. I hadn't expected to see her again so soon, certainly not with rain still dripping from her gloves as if she'd run straight from our table to my doorstep. She looked diminished, her hair damp with rain, her gloves creased and darkened by water. Her face, which earlier had carried a glow of poise, was now pale, eyes wide with something near terror. She reached the office doorway and paused as though the weight of the room pressed her back. "Mr. Goodwin," she whispered, "I had nowhere else to go." Wolfe's eyes opened, narrowing at the sight of her. His bulk shifted, but he remained seated. "You may enter," he said evenly. She stepped inside, her gloved hands twisting together. I moved a chair nearer the desk and guided her into it. She sat stiffly, gaze flicking between Wolfe and me. "You gave me a note," I said. "Perhaps now you can explain what 'they' means." Before she answered, she turned her face toward Wolfe as if seeking his judgment. "You are Nero Wolfe?" "Yes." "Then I beg you to listen. I cannot go to the police. They would never believe me, and if they did, it would be too late." Her voice trembled, and she pressed a hand against her throat. Fritz, ever thoughtful, appeared with a glass of water, which she accepted with a grateful nod. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "Miss, you may begin at the beginning. Names, places, facts. Vagueness will not serve you." She drew a breath and seemed about to speak, but the doorbell rang again, this time a heavier, more insistent peal. Fritz glanced toward Wolfe, who waved a finger in permission. When the office door opened again, Inspector Kramer filled the frame, his hat dripping and his expression set in its familiar scowl. He stepped inside without waiting for invitation, shaking rain from his coat. "Wolfe," he barked. "I'd ask what new circus you're running, but I haven't time." His gaze swept the room and fell on the girl in the chair. His face changed, surprise tempered by irritation. "Miss Claire Tilden," he said flatly. "That's a trick. She's supposed to be missing. Report came in an hour ago. Relatives clamoring, neighbors swearing she vanished from her apartment last night." The girl shrank in her chair, lips parting as though to deny it, then closing again with the futility of truth untrusted. Kramer took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "So, you're not drowned in the river after all. Care to explain yourself?" Her hands clenched together tightly. "I cannot," she began, but Wolfe interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut. "Enough. Inspector, she is under my roof, and until I consent otherwise, she remains unmolested. Your bluster will not wring sense from her." Kramer's jaw worked, but he respected the boundaries of the brownstone enough to halt. "Fine. But if she's reported missing, I'll have to make it official. And if she's mixed in with any dirty business, you'll be holding the bag, Wolfe." Wolfe closed his eyes again, folding his hands across his stomach. "Phooey. Sit, if you insist, but be silent. I will determine what, if anything, this young woman has to impart." The silence stretched, filled only by the ticking of the office clock and the soft hiss of rain against the windows. Claire lowered her gaze to her lap, twisting her gloves, while Kramer loomed by the door with the patience of a bulldog waiting for a mistake. I moved behind her chair, ready to record whatever confession or revelation might follow. Wolfe, opening his eyes once more, spoke with deliberate weight. "Miss Tilden, you may proceed, but understand, if you wish to be assisted, you must give us the truth entire. If you withhold, even by a hair, you imperil yourself more than any enemy could." Her throat worked as she swallowed. Then she lifted her gaze, steady at last, though shadowed by dread. "I will tell you," she said softly, "but you must believe me, because no one else will." She never did. A knock at the door, a flurry of questions from Kramer, and her nerves snapped. She bolted before Wolfe could extract more, vanishing into the rain as suddenly as she'd appeared. Wolfe dismissed it with a grunt, but the look in her eyes stayed with me. The telephone rang at 8:30, sharp against the drizzle that had hung over the city since dawn. I was in the office, filing reports Wolfe would never read, when the call came through from a detective down at the East River precinct. His voice carried the clipped indifference of a man accustomed to corpses, though he took trouble to emphasize that this particular corpse was young, female, and fished from the pilings off Pier 17 at daybreak. He asked if Mr. Wolfe might be interested, considering certain names cropping up. I told him Wolfe never was, not at that stage, but I would stop down. I hung up, gave Wolfe the briefest explanation, and received no more than a grunt and a flick of his eyes back to the book he was reading. The riverfront smelled of rust, brine, and gasoline. Fog clung low to the water, swallowing the slow movement of barges and the sharp outlines of tugboats. A uniformed patrolman guided me through a knot of longshoremen who stared with the casual curiosity of men accustomed to trouble. Under the shadow of the pier, 2 detectives bent over the body laid out on a tarpaulin. She had been pulled from the water not long before, and her clothes clung tight, heavy with river filth. The pale hair plastered against her cheeks left no room for doubt. It was Claire Tilden. I stood looking down, the damp smell rising up, and felt the weight of her eyes from 2 nights ago, wide, desperate, and searching for a lifeline. I had treated her words lightly, allowed myself to be amused by her insistence that I should remember. Now she was stone still, lips faintly blue, lashes beaded with river grit. A dancer who had carried herself like a flame on a stage had ended on wet boards beneath a pier. The older detective straightened, pulling his coat tighter. "That's Tilden, all right. Dancer at Gallardo's place. Connections to half the ward bosses from here to Tammany Hall." He spat into the water and added, "And plenty who'll want this hushed." I asked how she had been found. A dock worker had spotted a body snagged against a piling, alerted a patrol, and the harbour unit had dragged her in. No signs of robbery. Her handbag was missing, but her jewellery remained. A bracelet on one wrist, simple earrings still in place. Death, they said, was likely from drowning, though bruises on her arms suggested she had been handled roughly. I gave them what little I had, her visit to Wolfe's office, her plea for help, the note. One detective scribbled in his pad, unimpressed. They would follow their usual routine: statements, coroner, a few questions tossed at Gallardo, then the file shelved with dozens like it. By late morning I was back at the brownstone. Wolfe listened in silence as I described the riverfront, the tarpaulin, and the certainty that the girl he had dismissed as melodramatic was now cold and ruined. His mouth drew down in displeasure, not at the tragedy, but at the inconvenience of facts contradicting his disdain. Before I could elaborate, Inspector Kramer barged in without ceremony. He smelled of rain and cigars, and wore the smirk of a man who believed he had Wolfe cornered. "So, your guest last night turned up in the river," he said. "You'll forgive me if I take satisfaction." Wolfe's eyes closed, lids heavy. "Inspector, if Schadenfreude lengthened life, you would live forever. I am not responsible for the fortunes of every distressed female who darkens my threshold." "She wasn't just distressed," Kramer shot back. "She's dead, and you were the last to see her alive. That means I'll have men swarming over this house if I need to." I started to bristle, but Wolfe lifted a hand, silencing me. "You will do as you must. I will endure it as I must. But if you have no more than gloating, kindly confine it to your own office." Kramer gave me a look that promised more trouble, then left with his coat flapping like a sail in the hall draft. The office settled into a thick silence broken only by the faint clink of Fritz preparing luncheon in the kitchen. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, lips compressed as though retreating to his orchids in spirit if not in body. I had no intention of letting him withdraw. "She came here," I said quietly. "She gave me a note asking for help. She said she trusted me, and now she's been hauled from the river like rubbish. If you're content to sit there while Kramer chalks it up as another nightclub girl who mixed wrong, fine, but I'm not." His eyes opened, dark with annoyance. "Archie, your sentimentality is misplaced. I did not invite her here. She was not a client." I pulled the folded note from the drawer and laid it again before him. "She asked for help. That's enough." The knock that followed was firm, measured, and unmistakably genteel. Fritz admitted a tall, well-dressed man in a dark coat, carrying a hat with deliberate care. His hair was silver at the temples, his bearing refined, and his eyes sharp with suppressed agitation. He introduced himself with precision. "Daniel Tilden, uncle to Claire." He wasted no time. "Mr. Wolfe, I have been informed of your reputation. My niece has been murdered, and I demand justice." Wolfe arched a brow. "Demands are impolitic, but proceed." Daniel Tilden's voice tightened. "Claire was not perfect. She chose poor company, that Gallardo and his filthy clubs. But she was family blood, and she carried my name. The police will dismiss her as another cheap casualty. I will not allow it. You are said to be a man who uncovers truth where others fail. I am prepared to pay any sum required." Wolfe exhaled, slow and ponderous. "Money, sir, is not the sole inducement. Convenience, comfort, the expenditure of my energies, all weigh equally. Why should I shoulder the labour the police are disinclined to perform?" I spoke before Tilden could reply. "Because she came here, Mr. Wolfe. She sat in that chair and asked for help. You dismissed her as melodramatic. I took her note. This isn't conjecture, it's responsibility." Wolfe's glare turned on me, heavy as stone, but I did not look away. Daniel Tilden leaned forward, voice carrying the controlled force of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Mr. Wolfe, if reputation means anything to you, consider mine. I will not have Claire's name end in scandal whispered on street corners. If justice must be bought, I will buy it. But I expect you to deliver." The office was thick with tension, the rain pattering harder against the windows. Wolfe shifted his bulk in the yellow chair, adjusting his position as though surrendering to inevitability. "Very well," he said at last. "Mr. Tilden, I will undertake this inquiry. Archie will liaise with the police and the unsavoury denizens of Gallardo's world. I will, regrettably, exert myself." His eyes closed as though the matter now concluded, but the corners of his mouth betrayed irritation. He had been manoeuvred by circumstance, by my insistence, and by the demand of a wealthy man unwilling to let his niece's death be forgotten. Daniel Tilden rose, relief and grim satisfaction mingling in his expression. "Then you will hear from me tomorrow with details of her acquaintances and the funds necessary to proceed." He bowed slightly and departed, Fritz shadowing him to the door. Silence returned. Wolfe sat motionless, but his lips pressed thin. I remained standing by the desk, staring at the paperweight that pinned Claire's final note. Guilt gnawed like a rat at the edges of my composure. I had not believed her, and now she was drowned, another name in a police blotter. Wolfe finally spoke, voice low. "Archie, you may consider your conscience absolved. I have accepted responsibility. Whether that leads to illumination or irritation remains to be seen." I nodded, though the weight on my chest refused to lift. Outside, the river kept moving, indifferent to the lives it swallowed. The rain had eased by nightfall, leaving the streets slick with reflected light from neon signs and the occasional passing taxi. The Gallardo Club stood near the edge of Broadway's neon stretch, its facade dressed in gaudy lights that promised sophistication to patrons who preferred noise to refinement. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of liquor and perfume, layered over the tang of cigarette smoke. A band pushed through a brassy number on the stage, and the dance floor glittered with sequined dresses and tuxedos that had seen better tailoring. Vince Gallardo held court at a corner table, broad shoulders squeezed into a white dinner jacket, a scar cutting through the permanent smile etched on his face. His reputation stretched further than the band's trumpet section: mob ties, gambling dens, and a knack for convincing aldermen to forget ordinances. When I introduced myself, his eyes flickered with suspicion, then amusement. "So, you're Wolfe's boy," he said, voice rolling with practiced charm. "The one with the good suits and sharper tongue. You here to tell me Claire's drowning is my problem?" "I'm here to ask," I replied, settling into the chair across from him. "Claire Tilden worked here. She died. That ties her name to yours whether you like it or not." He leaned back, raising a hand to signal the waiter. "She danced here, yes. A good draw. Men liked to watch her. Women envied her. But that's business, nothing more." The waiter set down 2 glasses. Gallardo pushed one toward me. "She had admirers, Mr. Goodwin. More than one. Some with thicker wallets than others. If she's dead, maybe she chose poorly. That doesn't lay at my feet." His casual dismissal rang too pat. I asked about her last night at the club. Gallardo swore she had left alone around midnight after a quarrel with another dancer. He waved a hand, and from the shadow of the bar emerged Ellen Rayburn. Ellen was sharp-featured, with dark hair pulled tight and a dress that seemed chosen for competition rather than comfort. She gave me a long, appraising look before sliding into the booth beside Gallardo. "You're the detective," she said, "the one who pretends to be polite while digging through a lady's secrets. Claire never understood boundaries. She thought the stage was hers alone. She flirted with men who already had arrangements. She deserved a warning." Her eyes glinted as she spoke. I asked if the warning had extended to pushing her into the river. Ellen's laugh was low, bitter. If I'd wanted her gone, I wouldn't have bothered with water. But she had it coming. You don't make enemies with men like Hale and expect bouquets. The name landed. Richard Hale, the reformist politician climbing ladders in City Hall, had been whispered in connection with Claire. I filed it away, but pressed Ellen further. She claimed she had seen Claire slip a note to someone that night, though she would not say who. Gallardo cut her off with a glare, and the conversation ended as the band launched into another number. I left the club with the distinct sense of eyes following me. The pavement glistened under the neon, and a cab carried me north to the address of Daniel Tilden, Claire's uncle. His townhouse stood on a quiet street, respectable brick trimmed with polished brass fittings. A butler admitted me to a study lined with volumes of law and finance. Daniel Tilden himself stood by the fireplace, lean and silver-haired, a glass of brandy in hand. His gaze was cold, his words precise. "You are Wolfe's assistant. I had expected him, but he never stirs. Tell me what progress you've made." I described my visit to Gallardo's club, omitting nothing of Ellen's barbs. Tilden's jaw tightened. Claire was reckless. I told her so repeatedly. She wasted her gifts on sordid company when she could have enjoyed security under my protection. She was to inherit, yet she chose to gamble it on dubious friendships. There was no grief in his tone, only irritation that his niece had embarrassed him. I asked about her politics, her association with Hale. He frowned deeply. She fancied herself influential, thought she could steer reform by whispering in ears better left untouched. I warned her to leave that charade, but she was stubborn, willful, and now— He stopped, drained his glass, and set it down hard on the mantel. "Now she has made me a spectacle." His eyes narrowed on me. You will find who did this, Mr. Goodwin, and when you do, I expect silence on matters that stain the family name. Wolfe understands discretion. I trust you will too." The butler showed me out, the door closing firmly behind. The final call of the evening took me to the townhouse of Richard Hale, the reform-minded councilman with a reputation for railing against vice while smiling at donors who profited from it. His home was a more modest affair than Tilden's, though no less polished. Hale greeted me himself, tall, smooth, with eyes that measured everything in terms of advantage. His wife lingered in the background, a pale figure in satin, lips pressed thin. I explained my purpose. Hale listened, nodding gravely. Yes, I knew Miss Tilden. She was passionate about reform, determined to see improvements in working conditions and wages for dancers and musicians. She brought me evidence, names, sums, places. I admired her courage. His wife's gaze sharpened at that, though she said nothing. Hale continued. I warned her she was treading dangerous ground. Men like Gallardo do not forgive. She laughed, said she was careful. I urged her to leave it to me, but she insisted on handling things her way. He spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. Now she is gone, and a voice for reform has been silenced. I grieve her loss, though others will not. I asked whether his concern had extended beyond politics. His wife answered, her tone cool as ice. My husband concerns himself with the city, Mr. Goodwin, not with chorus girls who mistake attention for influence. Hale flushed faintly, though he maintained composure. He denied any impropriety, any meetings beyond public ones, yet the smell of expensive cigars lingered faintly in the study, and I remembered the ash stain on the scarf Wolfe had noted. Leaving Hale's residence, the city air felt thicker, as though weighed with secrets. Each of them, Gallardo, Ellen, Tilden, Hale, had reason to see Claire silenced. Each had offered truths shaded with self-preservation. I rode back to the brownstone with the night pressing against the cab windows, my pockets no heavier than when I left, but my mind filled with voices, lies, and one drowned dancer who seemed determined to haunt me. Back in the office, Wolfe sat waiting, a book unopened on his lap. His eyes rose to meet mine, questioning without words. I poured a drink, sat, and began to report. The package from the precinct arrived in the late afternoon, wrapped in brown paper and string, its corners softened by damp from the day's drizzle. Fritz brought it into the office as though it might soil the polished wood, then retreated to his kitchen sanctuary. Wolfe, in his yellow chair, raised his eyes just long enough to acknowledge its presence. I slit the wrapping with my penknife and set the contents on the desk. Claire Tilden's belongings made a small heap, a pitiful summary of a life folded into evidence, a compact with cracked mirror, a worn purse containing a few coins and a lipstick stub, a pair of gloves darkened by use, and a silk scarf red as wine spilled on linen. I unfolded the scarf and held it toward the lamplight. Against the shimmer of the fabric, a faint dusting marked one corner, a grey smear clinging to the sheen. I leaned closer. Ash, I said. Not from a fireplace, too fine. Smells faintly of cigar. Wolfe stirred, his bulk shifting as though the words tugged at him unwillingly. He extended a hand, and I placed the scarf across his palm. His fingers, surprisingly delicate for their size, traced the stained corner. He lifted it to his nose and inhaled, then let out a contemplative rumble. Not pipe, he said. Not cigarette. A cigar of quality. Short filler would not burn so evenly. The ash here is compact, well-formed. He set the scarf back on the desk. Who among our dramatis personae smokes such things? Richard Hale, I said. Councilman, reformer, household with expensive tastes. His study smelled of cigars when I visited. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Yes. And Gallardo? He prefers cigarettes, cheap and plentiful. Tilden? Brandy is his indulgence. Miss Rayburn? Nothing but envy, which leaves no residue. But Hale? Yes, that fits. I folded the scarf carefully, then paused. Something in its presence unsettled me. I had not noticed it in her belongings before. Perhaps it had been tucked deep, or perhaps I had not looked closely enough when she first came. I remembered her in this very room, pale, trembling, voice tight with fear. She had clutched her bag as though it held the sum of her protection. Wolfe seemed to follow my thoughts. She was nervous here, he said. furtive, watching the door as though she expected pursuit. You dismissed her agitation as female whimsy, but now, Archie, we must re-examine. Did she deliberately seek to appear forgettable to you? I frowned, leaning back. I never forget a face, and yet she claimed we had met. She even repeated a line I might have said. If she wanted me to forget, she succeeded. That isn't natural. Precisely, Wolfe said. She wished to pass through your notice as through a curtain. It is a tactic, and a rare one. To be memorable is dangerous when enemies abound. To be forgotten is safety, until it fails. He shifted in his chair, eyes closing briefly. Every visitor must be catalogued, Archie, not only those who impress themselves upon you. Your failure here was not in memory but in presumption. You assumed she could not make herself invisible. She did. I bristled at the rebuke, though it carried truth. If she carried this scarf and it bears Hale's mark, then she was closer to him than he admitted, close enough to take the ash from his cigar. Wolfe opened his eyes again, fixing me with the weight of their stare. Close enough to quarrel, or to threaten. If she used this as evidence, it is a fragile weapon. But it tells us something. She was gathering fragments, hoping they would amount to protection. Instead, they betrayed her. I set the scarf aside, the fabric sliding over the polished desk like spilled blood. The room felt heavy, the ticking of the clock a reminder that time had already outrun her. She sat there, I said quietly, nodding toward the red chair opposite Wolfe's, and I let her go, with nothing more than a note. Now we have a scarf with ash, a handful of belongings, and a girl in the river. It doesn't seem enough. It is what we have, Wolfe replied, his voice measured, and we will make it suffice. Threads, Archie, are never whole cloth until woven. Your task is to find where this scarf was worn, who noticed it, and how it travelled from Hale's smoke to Claire's possession. That is the beginning. The lamplight glinted on the red silk, casting faint shadows across the desk. I folded it once more, slid it into an envelope and locked it in the drawer. Somewhere in the city, a man had left his signature in ash on a woman's scarf, and that trace might yet speak louder than words. Inspector Kramer arrived in the late morning, brushing past Fritz with the air of a man eager to deliver bad news. His coat was damp at the shoulders, his shoes left faint prints on the hall runner, and he came straight into the office without ceremony. Wolfe looked up from his orchids catalogue with the resigned irritation of a man forced to endure interruptions he could not prevent. Kramer planted himself in the red chair opposite Wolfe's desk, slapped his hat onto his knee, and leaned forward with relish. Gallardo's clean, airtight. He was in his club all night the girl disappeared. Half a dozen dancers back him, the bartender too. He didn't lay a finger on her. I was standing near the window, hands in pockets. Half a dozen dancers, I said. That's a chorus line, not an alibi. Kramer's jaw tightened. Don't get smart, Goodwin. They gave consistent times down to the minute. Gallardo was playing host to a big table until nearly 2. There's no way he left. Wolfe closed the catalogue, setting it aside with exaggerated patience. Inspector, consistency in testimony proves only rehearsal, not truth. You are aware that Gallardo's establishment depends on the loyalty of his employees. Their statements are purchased with wages and perhaps with more. Kramer snorted. You always want it complicated. Sometimes it's just simple. The man was there, people saw him, and the clock agrees. The clock? Wolfe echoed, lifting an eyebrow. Kramer produced a small notebook. They all say he toasted a visiting businessman from Chicago at exactly 12:30. There was a clock on the wall behind the bar. Everyone noticed. I caught Wolfe's glance and answered with a shrug. Maybe, but a clock doesn't say where a man was 5 minutes earlier. Wolfe exhaled heavily. Archie, fetch me the transit schedule. I retrieved a folded timetable from the file cabinet. Wolfe opened it across his desk, scanning the grid with narrowed eyes. The club is on Broadway near 49th. The river is less than 20 minutes by motorcar, 10 by cab if traffic is thin, yet the dancers claim he never left. He tapped a finger against the timetable. But the last streetcar from 57th eastbound departed at 12:15. If Gallardo truly appeared at the club at 12:30 as they swear, then the timing does not align, unless, of course, the clock was inaccurate or the witnesses instructed. Kramer shifted, irritated. You're twisting it. You think 6 girls and a bartender all lied in unison? Yes, Wolfe said flatly. I added, and it wouldn't be the first time. Showgirls don't argue with a boss who signs their envelopes. Kramer scowled, but he knew Wolfe's reasoning wasn't smoke. He slammed the notebook shut and left muttering about wild goose chases. That evening I went back to the Gallardo Club. The band played a tired foxtrot, the customers were few, and the atmosphere carried the forced gaiety of a place past its peak hour. Ellen Rayburn was leaning against the bar, her dress cut to reveal more attitude than fabric. She watched me approach with a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. "Back again," she said. "You detectives never tire of asking the same questions." I slid onto the stool beside her. "Then humour me. When exactly did you see Gallardo that night?" She sipped her drink, leaving a smudge of lipstick on the rim. 12:30, same as everyone. He toasted the man from Chicago. We all clapped. What more do you need? Maybe just honesty, I said, because something tells me the story's rehearsed. Her smirk faltered. She looked away, fingers tightening on the glass. You don't know what it's like. He pays us, keeps us working. You think anyone dares contradict him? Try me, I said. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. He was gone, only for 15 minutes, maybe less. He said he had a call. When he came back, we pretended nothing happened. The toast came later, closer to 1, but he wanted the time fixed at 12:30, so we said 12:30. Why? He said it was important. He even pressed a little cash into our purses, said it was for loyalty. She swallowed hard. If he finds out I told you, I'll be finished here. I assured her name wouldn't pass my lips, then left before Gallardo noticed the crack in his defence. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened as I relayed Ellen's confession. He leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes closed in thought. So, he murmured, the alibi collapses. Gallardo lied. But why? To shield himself or another? The answer came sooner than expected. The next afternoon, Gallardo himself arrived, uninvited, striding into the office with the swagger of a man used to commanding a room. Fritz looked disapproving, but Wolfe permitted him entry with a curt nod. Gallardo planted his hands on Wolfe's desk. You've been sniffing around my girls, twisting words out of them. That's dangerous. Wolfe did not move. Dangerous, perhaps, but effective. Your alibi's flawed, Mr. Gallardo. You left your club. The dancers were bribed. Why? Gallardo's face darkened, but he hesitated, then dropped into the chair. His bravado softened into weary frustration. All right, I lied. I stepped out that night, but not for what you think. I wasn't near the river. I wasn't near Claire. I was protecting someone else. Who? Wolfe demanded. Gallardo shook his head. That's as far as I go. You want me to spill, you'll have to drag it out of me. But know this, Claire's death wasn't my doing. I've done plenty, but not that. She was trouble, yes, poking her nose into things, whispering to politicians thinking she could play with fire. But I didn't kill her. Wolfe studied him, the silence stretching thick between them. Then he said, Your refusal to name this someone else will not shield them for long. Truth emerges, Mr. Gallardo. Always. Gallardo rose, pulling his jacket tight. Then let it emerge without me. I've said my piece. He left without waiting for dismissal, the door closing hard behind him. Wolfe exhaled through his nose, lips curling in distaste. Archie, note it well. Gallardo is guilty of deceit, but not, I think, of murder. He protects another, and that is the thread we must unravel. The lamplight glowed on the polished desk. The red scarf lay in its envelope in the drawer, waiting to tie Gallardo's lies to the wider circle of deceit. I watched Wolfe close his eyes again, already shaping the next step, while outside the rain began to fall once more on the city that swallowed girls like Claire Tilden whole. The sidewalks glistened under a weak spill of lamplight, the rain having quit an hour earlier, but leaving the city coated in damp shine. I walked briskly along Lexington, collar turned up, hat brim low, heading back toward the brownstone after a round of calls that had yielded little besides sore feet. The street was quiet for that stretch, only the hum of a lone taxi rolling past and the distant clang of the 3rd Avenue L. I caught the echo of shoes behind me, a little too measured, a little too insistent to be chance. I slowed, pausing at a tobacconist's shuttered window, letting my reflection give me the angle I needed. 2 men, shoulders squared in the wrong sort of way, lingered half a block back. They stopped when I stopped, then started again as I resumed, closing the gap like men who thought they were hunters. I turned the next corner into a narrower street where the lamplight thinned and the fog still clung low. The footsteps quickened, echoing off the damp brick, and I knew the play was about to begin. They came fast, one lunging from behind, the other blocking my path. The first aimed for my arm, the second for my ribs, both with the awkward precision of men rehearsed for intimidation rather than skill. I twisted, dropped a shoulder, and sent the first stumbling into the wall, but the second caught me with a fist that knocked the breath from my chest. We grappled on the wet pavement, his hand clawing for my wallet in a parody of mugging, while the other scrambled upright, drawing a length of pipe from beneath his coat. The pipe whistled close enough to stir my hair as I shoved the second man hard into his partner. They staggered together, cursed, and came again, but a sharp whistle from the corner froze them mid-step. A black sedan idled under the lamplight, engine muttering low. One of the men hissed an oath, then both retreated, melting into the sedan's shadows before it pulled away, tires whispering against the wet street. I straightened, brushing grime from my coat, chest heaving. My ribs ached, lips stung, but I was intact. I picked up my hat from the gutter, dusted it against my sleeve, and walked the rest of the way home with the casual air of a man who had been through worse and would not give the satisfaction of complaint. Inside the brownstone, the warmth hit like balm. Fritz looked up from the hall table where he had been polishing silver, eyes widening at my condition. "Mr. Goodwin!" he exclaimed. I waved him off with a grin, though it felt crooked with the swelling lip. In the office, Wolfe sat squarely in his chair, a book balanced against his stomach, orchid's perfume drifting faintly from the adjoining room. He raised his eyes as I entered, taking in the scuffed coat, the bruise forming on my jaw, the way I favoured one side. "Pfui," he said. "You resemble a pugilist who lost." "Your concern overwhelms me," I replied, dropping into my chair. "Two men staged a mugging, poorly. They were interested in me, not my wallet." Wolfe closed the book, set it aside, and studied me with narrowed eyes. "Describe." I told it plain: the footsteps, the ambush, the pipe, the waiting sedan. Wolfe listened, fingertips pressed together, his bulk immobile except for the faint rise of his chest. "They wish to discourage you," he said finally, "to warn without killing. They fear you are too near to something." "Or someone," I added, "because this wasn't random, too rehearsed, too clean. They wanted to rattle me, not finish me, and they wanted to remind us someone is watching." Wolfe grunted, displeased. "Archie, you are reckless, yet your survival is occasionally useful. Have you learned anything worth the cost of bruises?" I leaned back, wincing slightly. "Yes. While you were communing with your orchids, I paid a visit to a couple of Claire's old haunts. The talk is she had a steady appointment at the Metropolitan Hotel, afternoons, discreet entrances, always with the same man, and the name tied to the whispers is Richard Hale." Wolfe's eyes opened wider, though his body did not move. Hale again, reformist politician, loudly opposed to vice, quietly fond of cigars, and she met him in secret. "So the rumour says," I replied. "The bellboy saw her arrive more than once. The housekeeper confirmed Hale's suite was often occupied when he should have been at committee meetings. She was careful, but not careful enough." Wolfe reached for his glass of beer, sipped, and set it down with deliberate weight. "This corroborates the ash on her scarf. She carried a token of his presence. If she threatened exposure, he had motive." I tapped my swollen lip with a fingertip. "And someone just went out of their way to remind me to stop digging. That suggests the trail to Hale is real. Otherwise they wouldn't bother." Wolfe closed his eyes, the faintest crease forming at his brow. "Then, Archie, we must assume your every movement will be watched. Your capacity for flippancy is undiminished, but I require your body intact. You will proceed with caution." "Caution?" I said with a smile. "I thought you preferred efficiency." "Efficiency requires a functioning assistant," he retorted. The clock ticked in the heavy silence that followed. Outside, the fog thickened again, wrapping the city in damp shrouds, while inside Wolfe's office the air held the weight of inevitability. We had entered a circle where politics, crime, and a drowned girl converged, and someone had already decided my continued curiosity was unwelcome. Bruised though I was, the message only sharpened my resolve. The Hale residence stood on a quiet stretch of East 73rd, the kind of townhouse that announced discretion more than grandeur. A brass knocker polished to a mirror shine reflected my hat brim as I raised it. The maid who answered carried the pinched look of staff trained to weigh visitors by the cut of their suits. She hesitated until I gave my name and added Nero Wolfe's with enough authority to rattle her reluctance. She admitted me into a hall panelled in dark wood, where the faint scent of polish mixed with the sharper tang of cigars. Richard Hale entered moments later, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a double-breasted suit cut to perfection. His hair was brushed back with meticulous care, and his eyes, pale and sharp, took me in with the calculation of a man accustomed to negotiation. He extended a hand that conveyed warmth without sincerity. "Mr. Goodwin," he said smoothly, "I've heard of you. You represent Mr. Wolfe?" "That's right," I replied, taking his hand. "We're looking into the death of Claire Tilden. You knew her." He gestured toward a sitting room where heavy drapes dulled the afternoon light. Books lined the shelves, the titles half political theory and half law. A decanter and glasses stood ready on a low side table. Hale motioned for me to sit, then poured 2 measures of bourbon without asking. He handed me one and settled opposite. "Yes," he said, voice even. "Miss Tilden came to me on several occasions. She was concerned about labour practices in nightclubs and theatres. Dancers underpaid, musicians docked, conditions ignored by owners who profited handsomely. She wanted reform. She was passionate." I sipped the bourbon. Passionate enough to risk her life, because that's what she did. Hale's expression tightened. "Passion is dangerous, Mr. Goodwin. She had evidence, or thought she did. Lists of names, amounts of money, rumours of payoffs. I warned her to leave it with me. I have influence, I can push legislation, but she insisted on keeping her own counsel." I let silence stretch, the ticking of the mantel clock filling it. Hale shifted slightly, eyes narrowing. "You suggest I failed her. I assure you I did what I could." "Did she ever threaten to expose someone?" I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. "She was more idealist than blackmailer. She believed the world could be changed if only someone would listen." At that moment a door opened, and a woman entered with the grace of someone who knew every eye would follow her. Mrs. Hale was tall, elegantly dressed in dark silk, her hair pinned perfectly, her face composed into an expression of polite disdain. She acknowledged me with the briefest nod, then moved to stand beside her husband, one hand resting lightly on his chair. "This is Mr. Goodwin," Hale explained. "He represents Nero Wolfe." "I know who he is," she said coolly. Her gaze settled on me, sharp as a blade. "You're here about the girl, Claire Tilden." "That's right," I said. She tilted her head. "My husband has already explained. She was involved in politics, at least she thought so. But politics was only part of it. A woman like her doesn't attach herself without expecting more than meetings and speeches." Hale stiffened. "Helen." She cut him off with a glance. "Don't pretend otherwise. She wanted more than your time. She wanted to be indispensable. She wanted what wasn't hers to have." Her voice was steady, her eyes cold. I let her words hang before replying. "You're suggesting she had personal expectations." "I'm stating it," she said. "And if you think my husband was fool enough to indulge them, you are mistaken. He humoured her for the sake of appearances, nothing more." Hale shifted uncomfortably, his hand tightening on the arm of the chair. He forced a smile. "My wife is protective, Mr. Goodwin. Perhaps too protective. Claire was admiring. That is all." The bourbon in my glass caught the lamplight, and I considered the ash stain on the scarf locked in Wolfe's drawer. Hale's study smelled faintly of cigars, though none were lit. The ash had been neat, compact, like the kind a man of his station would smoke. I set my glass down. "You favour cigars, don't you, Mr. Hale? Imported, expensive. Dominican, perhaps?" His eyes flickered, the smile thinning. "I indulge occasionally. Why?" "No reason," I said lightly. "Just a detail." Mrs. Hale's gaze sharpened. She seemed to sense the undercurrent, though her expression betrayed nothing beyond frost. I rose, hat in hand. "Thank you for your time. If I have further questions, I'll be in touch." Hale stood quickly, as though eager to usher me out before I pressed further. "Of course. Anything for the sake of justice." The maid showed me to the door, her eyes avoiding mine. Outside, the street was hushed under a low fog that had drifted in from the river. I pulled my collar high and walked toward the corner, the scent of cigars clinging faintly to my coat like an echo. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, a volume open before him, beer at his elbow. He looked up as I entered, taking in the expression I wore. "Well?" he asked. "Hale says Claire was lobbying for reform," I said. "His wife says she wanted more than speeches. And his house smells like cigars that match the ash on Claire's scarf." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "So, motive, means, opportunity. Yet Hale is protected by influence. An accusation without certainty would be folly. We cannot confront directly." I dropped into my chair, rubbing at my temple. "Then what's the move?" He closed the book with a soft thud. "We wait. Threads must tangle before they may be pulled. In time, Mr. Hale will reveal himself." The room grew quiet, the ticking clock marking seconds heavy with implication. Outside, the fog thickened, muffling the city's restless noise. Inside, the scarf lay in its envelope, its red silk stained with ash, silent testimony that the truth was near, but dangerous to touch. The evening had drawn close with a damp heaviness, fog pressing against the brownstone windows like a curtain determined to seal the city away. Wolfe had finished dinner, Fritz having served a roast duck fragrant with orange, and now sat enthroned in his yellow chair with a glass of beer beside him. I'd just returned from the Gallardo Club, my shoes still carrying the sticky residue of spilt gin and sawdust, when the bell rang with such insistence that even Fritz, reluctant to obey, appeared in the doorway with brows arched. "Another disturbance," he muttered. The disturbance, as it turned out, came in the form of Ellen Rayburn. She swept past Fritz with theatrical determination, her dark hair pinned tightly, her eyes bright with a feverish purpose. She wore a dress that suggested she had not gone home since her shift ended, sequins catching the lamplight in erratic bursts. She did not wait to be invited. She came directly into the office and stopped before Wolfe's desk as though the entire performance had been rehearsed on the ride uptown. "I killed her," she announced, breath catching as though the words themselves had weight. "I killed Claire Tilden." Wolfe lifted his gaze slowly from the book he had been perusing. His face betrayed no surprise, no flicker of interest beyond the barest tightening at the corners of his mouth. He set the book aside, folded his hands upon his stomach, and regarded her with the composure of a magistrate listening to a schoolgirl's recitation. Inspector Kramer chose that moment to arrive, barging into the office with his usual disdain for courtesy. He was trailed by two detectives who looked as though they would rather be anywhere else. Kramer took in Ellen's posture, her flushed cheeks, and the words still hanging in the air. He clapped his hands together with satisfaction. "Well, Wolfe, there's your answer," he said. "Case closed. She admits it. I'll take her downtown and be done." Ellen turned toward him with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Yes. I pushed her. She mocked me, said she would steal everything, my job, my man, my future. We argued outside the club near the river. I shoved her. She stumbled, fell in, and I ran. I couldn't face what I'd done." Kramer snapped his notebook open, scribbling with the energy of a man eager for headlines. "You hear that, Wolfe? That's as clear as they come. Confession, motive, means, all wrapped up. You can stop sniffing at Gallardo and Hale. One jealous girl, one dead girl, and that's the end." I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Wolfe. He remained perfectly still, his eyes half-lidded, as if Ellen's drama were nothing more than an interruption of his digestion. When at last he spoke, his voice carried calm authority that silenced even Kramer. "Miss Rayburn," he said, "you claim the quarrel occurred outside the Gallardo Club?" "Yes." "And you pushed Miss Tilden into the river there?" "Yes," Ellen whispered, eyes shining with unshed tears. Wolfe exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "Then your confession is false. The evidence contradicts you." Kramer bristled. "What nonsense is this? You heard her. She confessed." Wolfe's gaze moved from Ellen to Kramer with glacial steadiness. "Inspector, Claire Tilden's shoes bore traces of fine dust, not the sticky residue of a dance floor, nor the oil and dirt of a club entrance. Dust from a warehouse floor, pale, dry, laced with the grit of stored goods. That is where she went before her death, not your riverbank quarrel." Ellen's composure faltered. She staggered back, one hand pressing to her mouth. "Pfui," Wolfe said. "You are overwrought. guilty of jealousy, perhaps of wishing her ill, but not of murder. You never left the club that night, except to return home. Your confession is performance born of envy and fear. It spares others at the cost of your own liberty, but it cannot withstand fact. Kramer slammed his notebook shut. You always do this, Wolfe. A confession handed to us on a plate, and you pick it apart like a spoiled meal. You think dust on her shoes means more than her own words. Yes, Wolfe replied simply. Words deceive, dust does not. Ellen collapsed into the red chair, trembling. Her eyes darted between Kramer and Wolfe, desperation clouding them. I only wanted it to end, she whispered. She haunted me. Everyone said she was better, brighter, destined for more. I thought if I said it, they would stop asking questions. Wolfe gestured toward me. Archie, escort Miss Rayburn home. She is no longer useful here. Inspector, if you wish to pursue her confession, you may, but you will find it crumble under the coroner's microscope. Kramer's face turned a shade darker, his fists clenching. He looked as though he might burst, then barked a sharp order to his men. They moved reluctantly, as though aware Wolfe's words carried more weight than their superior's fury. You'll regret this, Kramer snapped. One day, Wolfe, you'll choke on your own cleverness. He stormed out, leaving the office vibrating with his indignation. Ellen rose slowly, steadied herself, and allowed me to guide her toward the door. She looked smaller now, the defiance drained, only fear remaining. Fritz took her arm gently, leading her out into the hall. When I returned, Wolfe had resumed his position, eyes closed, lips pursed in thought. The scarf lay folded on the desk, the faint trace of ash still visible under the lamplight. I dropped into my chair and let out a slow breath. You know, I said, there are easier ways to run an investigation. We could have let Kramer take her, called it a day, and gone on with our lives. Easier, Wolfe murmured, but not accurate. Claire Tilden deserves truth, not the convenience of a jealous dancer's melodrama. Facts, Archie. They alone lead to resolution. The fog pressed closer against the windows, the lamplight making a small island of clarity within the brownstone. Outside, the city churned with noise and deception. Inside, Wolfe waited, immovable, until the dust on Claire's shoes told the rest of its story. The Hudson fog lay heavy along the docks, coiling between warehouses like smoke reluctant to rise. The lamps cast weak halos over puddles slick with oil, and the air carried the sharp tang of brine mixed with rust. I walked slowly along the row of brick hulks, collar high, hat brim low, looking for the warehouse Ellen Rayburn's slip of the tongue had suggested. A nondescript structure loomed between two shuttered depots, its paint long flaked, its windows black squares staring blankly over the river. A faded number, half peeled, hung over the entrance. The lock on the side door had been twisted until it surrendered, and the boards leaned with the sag of neglect. I slipped inside, the smell of damp wood and dust settling over me. The interior was a cavernous dark, the rafters creaking with each gust from the river. Patches of moonlight pressed through broken panes high above, striping the floor with silver. My shoes crunched lightly on scattered debris, and the echo stretched long, as if the building were warning me to leave. In one corner, amid crates marked with faded shipping labels, I found the first sign of life. Cigarette butts, dozens of them, crushed into the concrete, their filters stained and frayed. A small mountain of ash littered the ground, not from casual trespassers, but from men who had waited, perhaps argued, while smoke clouded the air. Next to the pile sat a bottle once filled with rye, its neck chipped, and two glasses, dusty but not yet brittle. I crouched, running a finger through the ash. Wolfe had been right. Dust of this kind clung to Claire's shoes. She had been here, at this warehouse, among men who smoked and bargained. I searched further. Behind a stack of crates under a sheet of tarred canvas lay scattered papers weighted by a brick. I pulled them out, unfolded them carefully under the moonlight. The handwriting was hurried, uneven, but the meaning was plain enough. Lists of names, union locals, amounts scrawled beside each. Payoffs. Numbers that tied Gallardo's network of clubs to officials and ward bosses, each figure damning in its implication. I tucked the papers into my coat, my heart picking up a pace that the fog outside could not cool. Claire had gathered this. She had brought it to someone, maybe to Hale, maybe intending to protect herself with leverage. Instead, it had driven her into the river. A faint scuff behind me snapped me from thought. I froze, listening. Another scrape, deliberate, soft, no more than 20 feet away. I turned toward the darker stretch of the warehouse and caught the silhouette of a man stepping out from shadow, then another. They moved with the practiced assurance of men who had no business here beyond silencing intruders. The first raised a length of wood, gripping it like a club. The second edged closer, hand hidden inside his coat. My exit lay behind them, and the door I had entered was now just another mouth of blackness they could funnel me through. I drew back into the moonlit strip, forcing them into the open. "If you're here to give me directions," I said. "I left my map at home." They did not answer. The one with the club advanced first, swinging wide. I ducked, the wood cracking against a crate, splintering it. The other lunged, and I caught a glint of steel before I twisted aside. His blade nicked my sleeve but found no flesh. I shoved him hard into his partner, the two stumbling into the wreckage of the broken crate. I used the moment to dart sideways between stacks, my shoes kicking up dust in a trail I prayed they wouldn't track quickly. The warehouse seemed to shift in the fog-drenched dark, aisles narrowing, shadows multiplying. I spotted a ladder bolted to the wall, leading to a narrow catwalk that ran the length of the rafters. I scrambled up, boots striking metal rungs with a clang that echoed too loud. From below came curses, then the scrape of pursuit. At the catwalk's far end, a window gaped where glass had long since fallen away. Beyond it lay nothing but night air and the suggestion of a fire escape bolted to the brick. I slid through, boots finding iron with a jolt that rattled the frame. Behind me, a figure reached the window, swore, and pulled back rather than follow. I hurried down the escape, the iron groaning under my weight, and reached the street as the black sedan I half expected pulled into view at the corner. Its engine idled, headlights smothered, a predator crouching. I darted the other direction, into a narrower lane where the fog lay thicker and the lamps weaker. My shoes struck the pavement in rhythm with my heart until the sedan's hum faded behind me. When I reached the brownstone, bruised from the scramble, coat torn, I found Wolfe waiting in his chair as though he had been aware of each step I'd taken. Fritz raised his brows at my state but asked no questions, disappearing with silent efficiency toward the kitchen. I laid the papers on Wolfe's desk. He drew them toward him, unfolding each with precise care. His eyes scanned the scrawled names and figures, his lips pressing tighter with every line. He reached for his beer, sipped, and then set it down with a soft thud. "So," he murmured. Claire was no naive dancer caught in jealousy. She gathered evidence, Gallardo's machine, the politicians it greased, the unions it corrupted. She assembled it here, in that warehouse. "And someone thought drowning her would erase it," I said, easing myself into the chair with a wince. "Two men tried to persuade me otherwise tonight, but they lacked finesse. Claire's shoes matched the warehouse dust, and these papers prove she was ahead of us." Wolfe closed his eyes, his hands folding across his stomach. Her death was not passion, it was calculation. She wielded proof she did not understand, and it sealed her fate. The room grew heavy with silence, the papers lying between us like a verdict. Outside, the river fog pressed against the glass, thick and implacable. Inside, Wolfe sat motionless, already weaving deduction from fragments, while I sat with bruises blooming and the certainty that Claire Tilden's death had just become more dangerous to explain. Daniel Tilden arrived at the brownstone in the grey of late afternoon, his car nosing through the drizzle to stop at the curb with the precision of a man who had never in his life been late to an appointment. Fritz admitted him stiffly, though his civility never faltered, and ushered him into the office where Wolfe sat in his yellow chair, a ledger open on the desk before him. The air was heavy with lamplight, rain pattering faintly on the windows, the scent of damp earth rising from the orchids in the adjoining room. Tilden entered as though he owned the place, his silvered hair impeccable, his gloves tucked neatly into one hand, the other carrying the thin smile of a man accustomed to command. He removed his coat slowly, handing it to Fritz, then advanced until the lamplight caught the sharp angles of his face. "You asked for me, Mr. Wolfe," he said, voice clipped. "I trust this summons has purpose." "It does," Wolfe replied. His tone was smooth, but his eyes, dark and hooded, fixed on Tilden with the weight of judgment. He gestured toward the red chair opposite. "Be seated." Tilden lowered himself without grace, adjusting his cuffs. "I presume this concerns my niece." It concerns money, Wolfe said simply. Specifically trust funds, established for Claire Tilden by her parents, funds administered until their majority by you. The faint smile evaporated. Tilden sat straighter, his jaw tightening. You presume much. I presume nothing, Wolfe corrected. He touched the ledger with a finger, nudging it forward. These are bank records. Transfers routed through shell accounts, amounts withdrawn beyond allowance, deposits misfiled as maintenance of estate properties. In sum, embezzlement. Claire discovered this. She confronted you. Archie leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the colour rise in Tilden's face. His lips parted, then shut, as though he weighed denial against futility. At last, with a breath sharp enough to cut, he said, Yes. She confronted me. She came to my house, brandishing papers she should never have seen. She accused me of theft, threatened to expose me to my own board. I reminded her of family, of discretion, of obligations owed to those who raised her when her parents died. She would not listen. His voice grew harsher, each word bitten off. We quarrelled. I told her she was reckless, ungrateful, that she was gambling with scandal. She shouted, called me a coward, said she would ruin me, and then she left. Wolfe's eyes closed briefly, his head tilting back. And you followed her? No, Tilden snapped. I did not. I remained at home. My valet can attest. I was furious, but I am not a fool. To kill her would only destroy me further. I wanted her silence, yes, but I did not want her death. The office filled with silence, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on Wolfe's desk. The rain tapped steadily against the glass. Wolfe's hands rested upon his stomach, fingers interlaced, while his mind moved with measured precision. You admit embezzlement, Wolfe said at last. Tilden's chin lifted. I admit mismanagement, perhaps. Funds diverted to keep enterprises solvent. Investments made for the family's greater good. If she had waited, she would have benefited. Instead, she rushed to accuse, and now she is gone. His voice cracked slightly, the first fissure in his polished veneer. Do you think I wished her drowned like a gutter girl? She bore my name. She was blood. I said, Plenty of blood gets spilled over money. He turned a cold glare on me. You think me so clumsy, Mr. Goodwin? If I had wished her dead, would I have left a trail of bank slips behind? Would I confess to you here, in this room, where words carry weight? No. My sin is greed, not murder. Wolfe opened his eyes again, fixing him with a gaze that seemed to pierce flesh and bone. You quarrelled with her. You feared exposure. But your method, embezzlement cloaked as stewardship, is subtle, patient, years in the making. Murder by river is crude, impulsive, clumsy. It does not fit. Tilden exhaled, long and shuddering, as though released from a noose that had only grazed his neck. Then you believe me. I believe, Wolfe said, that you did not kill Claire. You had reason, but not the temperament. Someone else used her discovery, or feared her evidence and silenced her. Your betrayal of her trust was grievous, but it was not fatal. Tilden's shoulders sagged, his hands clenching once around the gloves before relaxing. If that is your conclusion, then I thank you for it. But you have still left me ruined. When this emerges, my name will be ashes. That, Wolfe said, is not my concern. Justice for Claire is. Tilden rose abruptly, reclaiming his coat from Fritz with a jerk. Then I will leave you to your justice, Mr. Wolfe. Do what you must. He strode from the room, the door closing sharply behind him. For a moment, the office was quiet again. Wolfe reached for his beer, lifted it, and drank deeply. He set it down with a soft thud, then closed his eyes once more. I stepped closer to the desk, tapping the ledger. So that's it? He robs his niece blind, admits it, but we let him walk? Yes, Wolfe murmured, because his guilt ends there. Murder is too immediate for him. He is a man of paper, not blood. His crime required years, signatures, deception of auditors. Drowning a woman in the river does not suit him. The hand that killed Claire was bolder, angrier, and less practiced at subtlety. Hale, I said. Wolfe opened his eyes, meeting mine. Yes, Richard Hale. The scarf, the ash, the whispers of meetings at hotels, the danger Claire courted in pressing him. He is our axis now, but his shield is influence, and we cannot topple it with conjecture. I sank into the red chair vacated by Tilden. The rain outside had quickened, rattling faintly on the panes. "So, where do we start?" Wolfe leaned back, folding his hands again. "We begin with Patience. We follow the dust on her shoes, the names in the ledger, the pattern of payoffs. Tilden was a diversion. Hale is the storm, and we will not confront him until the proof is absolute." The lamplight glowed warm on the ledger's open pages, the inked numbers dark and accusatory. I sat watching Wolfe, listening to the rain, knowing the path had narrowed. One betrayer had confessed, but the true killer still waited, shielded by cigars and influence somewhere beyond the fog. The brownstone had never felt so taut with expectancy. The lamps glowed warmly against the rain-darkened windows, Fritz having polished the brass shades until they reflected like muted suns. The chairs had been arranged with precision, Wolfe's yellow throne behind the desk, the 3 red leather seats aligned before him, and a pair of spares drawn from the dining room to accommodate the crowd. I had set the stage under Wolfe's direction, every placement deliberate, every distance calculated to enforce his authority. Outside, the fog pressed like a conspirator against the glass. Inside, the room hummed with tension as one by one the guests arrived. Daniel Tilden entered first, wrapped in indignation as firmly as in his overcoat. He gave Fritz his hat with a flick of the wrist, then took a red chair without invitation, the weight of wealth and reputation shielding him from courtesy. Ellen Rayburn came next, nervous, eyes darting around the office, sequined scarf drawn tight across her shoulders. She perched on the edge of her seat as though prepared to bolt at the first sharp word. Vince Gallardo arrived with the swagger of a man too accustomed to dim lights and louder applause. He dropped into his chair, smirk hovering, and folded his arms. "Nice place," he said, voice rolling across the room. "Not enough mirrors, but it'll do." Richard Hale entered last, his wife at his side like a figure carved from frost. Hale carried himself with the composure of a man used to command in committee rooms, his grey suit impeccable, his eyes measuring every corner. Mrs. Hale moved with gloved precision, lowering herself into the final chair without so much as a glance at her husband. Inspector Kramer arrived moments later, barging in with his 2 men, grumbling at the formality but settling into a corner, notebook ready. "If this is another one of your parlour stunts, Wolfe, it better sing," he said. Wolfe, seated in the yellow chair, did not rise, did not shift, did not acknowledge the remark. His eyes swept the room once, heavy-lidded, then closed for a beat as though he drew sustenance from the silence. At last he opened them and spoke, voice steady, deliberate. "You are all here because of Claire Tilden," he began. "Her death was not the whim of accident, nor the clumsy impulse of jealousy. It was murder, premeditated, with purpose and motive. And within this room sits the one who committed it." The air shifted. Ellen clutched her scarf tighter. Gallardo smirked but glanced away. Hale sat straighter, his expression a mask of polished calm, while his wife folded her hands with delicate precision. Wolfe continued, "We begin with the facts. Claire Tilden came to me. She entered this office pale, trembling, desperate. She gave Archie Goodwin a note, brief, urgent, a plea for help. And then she left, fearing pursuit. Hours later, she was found in the East River." He gestured toward me, and I produced the envelope containing the red silk scarf, laying it on the desk with a slow hand. Wolfe touched it with one thick finger. Among her belongings was this: red silk, delicate, carrying a faint smear of ash. Not ash from a cigarette nor a pipe. The mark of a fine cigar, burned evenly, compact, the indulgence of men who can afford the best. That ash led me first to Mr. Hale. Hale's mouth twitched, the faintest flicker. His wife's eyes narrowed. "But," Wolfe went on, "motive must support evidence. Claire quarrelled with her uncle. She discovered his embezzlement from the funds entrusted to her future. He admits as much. He had reason to silence her, yet the method does not suit him. His crimes were subtle, concealed with patience over years. Murder by drowning is crude. It does not fit his pattern." Daniel Tilden shifted in his chair, lips pressed thin, but he did not speak. "Miss Rayburn," Wolfe continued, "confessed dramatically. She spoke of a quarrel by the river, a shove, a fall. It was false. Her confession collapsed under dust found on Claire's shoes. Warehouse dust, pale, fine, traced to a depot by the docks. Claire was there, gathering evidence, papers listing names, union locals, sums of money tied to payoffs. Archie risked ambush to recover them. Claire was no naive girl, she was deliberate. She collected proof of Gallardo's entanglements with politics, perhaps hoping to shield herself. Gallardo shifted, jaw tightening, but forced a laugh. She was nosy. She liked to play above her station. That doesn't mean I drowned her. Wolfe ignored him. Indeed you did not. You lied, yes. You left your club that night, bribed your dancers to say otherwise. But when pressed, you admitted the truth. You stepped away to protect someone else. That act, though incriminating, was not murder. Gallardo leaned forward, eyes flashing. You think I'd cover for Hale? You're mad. Wolfe's gaze cut to him, then past him, to the couple seated together. His voice dropped slightly, commanding the stillness of the room. Claire met Richard Hale in secret, afternoons at hotels. She whispered reform, yes, but she also threatened exposure. She had proof of his corruption, his hypocrisy. The scarf carried his ash. The staged attack on Archie meant to discourage him, bore the clumsy hand of political fixers, not Gallardo's professionals. Claire even disguised herself when she came to Archie at the cafe, ensuring he would not remember her face, because she feared Hale's retribution. She believed anonymity would shield her. Ellen gasped faintly, hands flying to her mouth. Kramer scribbled furiously. Hale sat rigid, the mask cracking at the edges. His wife turned her head slowly, her profile as cold as marble, her eyes glittering. That, Wolfe said, voice rising, is why she told Archie they had met before. She needed him to believe in familiarity, to anchor her story, even as she veiled her true self. She calculated that a forgotten face might save her, but it did not. She confronted Hale, threatened to expose both his indulgences and his corruption, and he silenced her, with a scarf marked by his own vice. The silence was a weight pressing down on the room. Rain tapped steadily at the glass, the only sound. Hale's hand tightened on the arm of his chair until the knuckles whitened. At last he spoke, voice low, strained. You weave a fine tale, Mr. Wolfe, but you offer conjecture. No witness saw me. No one can prove I touched her. Wolfe leaned forward, his bulk shifting like a mountain come alive. You forget, sir, that facts accumulate. The scarf, the ash, the clandestine meetings, the staged assaults, all point to you. The warehouse papers Claire gathered were brought to you. You were the reformer who promised action. Yet instead of action, you sought protection. You feared exposure, not for the unions, not for the dancers, but for yourself. And when she pressed too hard, you killed her. Mrs. Hale spoke then, her voice sharp as glass. Richard, she said, just his name, but it carried condemnation. Her eyes locked on him, unblinking. Hale half rose, then sank back. She wouldn't stop, he muttered. She thought she could ruin me. Everything I've built, my career, my reputation, threatened by a girl who danced for drunks. I warned her. She laughed. The words fell heavy into the room. No one moved. Kramer snapped his notebook shut with a sound like a gavel. He barked orders to his men, who rose and moved to flank Hale. You're under arrest, Kramer said. His voice was harsh, triumphant. Hale did not resist. He stood slowly, straightened his coat, and allowed the detectives to take him. His wife remained seated, her face carved from ice, watching him with eyes devoid of pity. Gallardo muttered something inaudible. Ellen looked near fainting. Daniel Tilden sat rigid, staring at the floor. When they were gone, the brownstone exhaled. Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and lifted his glass of beer. He drank deeply, then set it down with care. It is done, he said simply. I looked around the room, the lamplight glinting on the now empty chairs. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the street, but inside the brownstone order had been restored, truth pulled from threads of dust and ash. And so the resolution closed, not with triumph shouted, but with quiet certainty, Wolfe's yellow chair anchoring the room, my thoughts still circling Claire's laugh, and Fritz's sandwiches anchoring my stomach. The world beyond might gnash and betray, but here at least truth had been drawn, served, and set to rest.